This week marks the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, and we celebrate the women who fought for that right. Yet so many of the Black women who helped secure that victory were still prohibited from voting long after its ratification. But they were undeterred. Without fanfare or recognition, they organized and testified and rallied and marched and fought, not just for their vote, but for a seat at the table.
Kamala Harris, the first Black woman to be nominated to run on a major ticket, talking about a seat at the table. Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America, and today we're talking about Black women. Sitting at our virtual table today, Dr. Martha Jones, history professor at Johns Hopkins University and the author of Vanguard, How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on Equality for All. And also with us is L. Joy Williams, political analyst and strategist, chair of the Higher Heights PAC. It's all about electing Black women to office, and the host of #Sunday Civics. So thank you so much, Joy and Martha, for being with us today. And I understand that you two have been in conversation. Joy interviewed Martha. There's so much is going on. I want you to know that I said to Martha Jones on social media, what the heck? How did historians become so hot? This book that you've written, Vanguard, places you right in the middle of the centennial of the women's vote and everything that's going on about Black women. Are you surprised at all about the attention that people are paying to Black women?
I am not, because I, as you know, just finished a book that really makes the argument that Black women have been building toward, working toward, strategizing to get right to this moment, such that when, the way I'd put it is, when this country is ready, Black women are there and ready to step into leadership. So I can't say I anticipated every detail of this unprecedented year. My goodness, who could have? But at the same time, I certainly understood where Black women were and the trajectory that we were on.
So Joy, you've been working to get women elected. A couple of years ago, saw phenomenal growth in Black women elected officials. What do you have to say about this year of 2020 with Kamala Harris on the Democratic vice presidential ticket as a candidate for the first Black woman, Indian woman, vice presidential candidate?
Well, what I would say is that Black women have been working and have prepared themselves for this. As Dr. Jones has mentioned, it is no surprise the leadership and the political acumen of Black women since we've been in this country, and the political operations and strategy that we have employed and implemented to get us to this point. What has happened is that we have, as each individual gets in, they are breaking open the doors and putting more seats at the table, if you will, so that more of us can come in. So this is a culmination of not just one individual's achievement, one individual Black woman's achievement. This is a culmination of all of those Black women ancestors who have been clawing and fighting not only for freedom, economic justice and inclusion, then the right to vote, and now the issues that some of the Black women have been put forth 100 years ago, against lynching, against police brutality, against for economic justice and inclusion and diversity and engagement. All of those things now have the ability to be addressed because Black women are in leadership positions and at the table.
Yeah, and yet, what had to happen as Vice President Joe Biden was selecting his running mate? You know, hundreds of Black women wrote saying it should be a Black woman. Hundreds of Black men, or over 100 at least, wrote the same thing. And then after he chose her, it's this huge defense of her because she's been being called names. Martha, how do you place that in the history of the way Black women have been treated in this country throughout this effort to vote, to win equality for all?
I would never speak for Senator Harris, but I'd venture to say that there is no Black woman in public life who is not familiar with, who has not endured, who's not been subject to a very specific brand of racism, right, which is that directed at Black women. So in some ways, we know that all too well. It's a story that we could tell going back 200 years. So what I see when I see Senator Harris, and frankly, the more than 120 Black women who are running for Congress in this election cycle, are women who understand the political landscape, the slings and arrows that they are going to confront, and frankly are not going to be deterred or kept from the podium or kept from expressing their ideas and building a constituency, expanding their constituency. I just don't see racism, sexism as keeping Black women from doing the work they've come to do.
Well, Joy, it has to be a part of the training and the prepping for Black women running for office. What do you see that is particularly acute for Kamala Harris to pay attention to as she's in this position and has these next few months in the center of a public storm?
Well, I think for Senator Harris, right, she's on a national platform that is going to be at a more heightened target for those who are racist, those who are sexist, and being able to separate that between her actual challenges to her record or to what she wants to do in the future is that defense you talk about of Black women and Black men coming together to defend her and to defend the ticket in that way is going to be emblematic of what is happening to a state senator, a treasurer, or another Black woman running for Congress in their local community. It is the same thing that they are experiencing. However, they don't have the national stage to be able to point to see that this, yes, is racist and sexist, right? And so at Higher Heights, we have often on occasion had to be that defense and help candidates across the country defend themselves against those kinds of attacks. What Senator Harris is going to experience is something that will be magnified. But I think it's important to highlight those so that we know that not only is Senator Harris going to face these challenges as a vice presidential candidate, but there are state treasurers, lieutenant governors, and other candidates, Black women candidates that will be down ballot as well. And as we are defending those kinds of sexist and racist attacks against Senator Harris, we at Higher Heights and others make sure that we highlight those issues and protect and defend the women who are down the ballot who don't get that much of attention.
All the way down. You know, much note was made, and with some surprise, that the Black men stepped forward and said, in support of Senator Harris. Historically, Martha, talk a little bit about that. There have been times, certainly Shirley Chisholm would have said it, I'm sure, that, she did not have the support of most Black men at that point. They felt it was their time. So historically, and this time around, the fact that Black men have stepped forward.
I think that, for a long time in this country, Black men and women stood in the same shoes, too many of them, disenfranchised, particularly coming out of 1920 and the ratification of the 19th Amendment. So Black men and women have a history together when it comes to political power, when it comes to voting rights, a shared history. And I guess I take from the letter that you point to as an opportunity to think about what it means for Black men to fully turn a corner and return to that sense that Black men and women stand in the same shoes too much of the time. Black women for 200 years have been making the case that the essential work of a long time ago, anti-slavery, in our own lifetimes, anti-racism, that work requires all the resources that we have, and particularly the extraordinary talents of Black women.
Yeah, and just as you have rewritten Black women into the push for the vote, and throughout history, never any attention. Joy, the civil rights movement, there are women who are also rewriting Black women into, that movement? Where do you see Black women and men at this point in this current race?
Well, I think what you see now is what we've always done. Black women have been at the head, the middle, the back room, and in the kitchen of every movement and action that we've put forth in this country to advance the rights of people of color, and particularly advance the rights of Black people. And we've done that even when being faced with sexism, even within our own family, if you will, and being from Black men, be they our fathers, be they our pastors, or our husbands and brothers. And so what we're seeing now is that Black women are unapologetic, and I think also things have shifted in a way where we can voice without the threat of sexual violence, at least in that sense, in terms of speaking up. Not to say that Black women still do not face sexual violence or domestic violence in all of that way. We still do, and we still disproportionately do not get justice in that stance. But we have a little bit more leeway, if you will, to be able to not only voice our demands and voice the return on our investment, whether it be to a political party or to our people, and the ability to say you're not going to erase our leadership and you're not going to erase our voices and our faces from these movements.
Right. So
that we've learned from that in the past.
Right, exactly. I want to turn a little bit to recent events. Kenosha, Wisconsin, another what seems to be senseless murder of an unarmed Black man. And I begin this part of the conversation with, as I always do these days, what about Breonna Taylor? Why don't we have justice there? And why can't we keep the attention focused on the women who are similarly discriminated against and brutalized? But Martha, your comments on this current episode of violence.
One of the things we know about Black women's politics going back 100 years is that we have never been narrow or single issue in our ambitions and in our objectives and our issues. So the women I write about who are struggling for voting rights to win the 19th Amendment in the early 20th century are as committed to, impassioned about, and effective when it comes to, for example, anti-lynching legislation, right? That Black women have long been tuned in to the scourge of terroristic violence. And I would situate the cases you've just reiterated in the long history of terroristic violence on Black Americans, police violence, yes, but also private violence. And I think Black women have long sort of stood up front. The great Ida B. Wells, of course, who not only taught us what lynching was and the scourge that it was, she documented it, and then she, at great personal risk and cost, advocated for federal anti-lynching legislation. Senator Harris, just in the months before she's entered this campaign, was on the floor of Congress, still pushing for federal anti-lynching legislation in this country. Black women have been in this struggle for a very long time.
Yeah, I watched that. Senator Harris and Senator Booker, as they, were presenting the case in the Senate, as with many social justice bills that have been passed by the House of Representatives, they are still sitting in the basement of the Senate, so it didn't make it through in this particular session. But you're right. She presented a compelling, unchallengeable case, for the anti-lynching law. I want to talk about a little bit about this election that's coming forward. Was just looking at some statistics about Black voting in 2016, and I know that there are people who would like to blame us for the Democrats not winning, for Hillary Clinton not being in. But what seemed to be true that in several key states, like, was it Michigan, where the it was only 11,000 votes that separated Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and over 200,000 Black people who did not vote that year. Can you talk a little bit about, is Kamala Harris enough enthusiasm to get the Black vote out, understanding voter suppression that's ahead of us and
Yeah.
with us currently? Joy?
Yeah, I think for that conversation, we have to think about the many different ways that compel someone to actually come out and vote. It is not solely alone enthusiasm for some. For some, it is also issues. For some, it is also believing that their vote or that the people that are on their ballot are going to have some influence, some direct influence on the issues they are facing day to day in their lives. And if you are disconnected from the engagement process, meaning that people do not engage you, candidates and campaigns do not engage you, they do not put forth an agenda or even talk to you about how their agenda and their policies are going to address your life. And that's up and down the ballot because, you know, as I say on the show, you know, we get pumped up to vote every 4 years, and a lot of the issues that we need addressed in our local community are further down the ballot. And so it's not just the president and the vice president that's what the contest that what's at stake. There's also what's at stake in terms of district attorneys, in terms of governors, in terms of state legislatures. And so it is incumbent on folks to not only address enthusiasm, and this has been my critique and to the Democratic Party and also to the Biden-Harris campaign. It's not enough for you to feed into the folks that just need enthusiasm to turn out. You actually have to also speak to the issues that would compel more people to be engaged in the process.
Yeah.
We have a problem in terms of engagement and voter engagement and people not voting. If you look at our overall statistics in the United States in terms of people who don't vote, and it's not just a Black people problem.
Sure.
You know, it's across,
Right, exactly.
it's across the country.
Right, right. But Martha, let's talk a little bit historically about that, because we are this year celebrating 100 years of white women being able to vote. Black women, as you point out so well in all of your work, were shut out and joined in the 1960s without voting, but not fully. But even so, 100 years of voting or 50 years of voting hasn't really even the score, so to speak. You know, it's more than voting that's required to bring about, you know, equality in this country.
Well, I guess what I would add to Joy's important comments is the element of voter suppression, right? That Black women, as they were in 1920, are being, in many jurisdictions, quite deliberately kept from the polls. And I think that's always missing when we hear analysts talk about turnout and bemoan turnout and think, well, there are deliberate efforts targeting communities of color, Black communities, Latinx communities, and this was true in 1920. One of the fears in 1920 is that everyone knows that if Black women get access to the polls and they're engaged, they will turn out and they will tip the balance of power, especially down ballot, as we say.
Sure.
That's true even in 1920. So I think voter suppression, frankly, tells us a lot about the fears of what happens when constituents like Black women understand their issues, are engaged, and without question, among ourselves, have the ability to mobilize and get to the polls when motivated. And so I think that the historical record is consistent with this moment in that the fear of Black women's votes leads to voter suppression. And we are unfortunately facing in 2020 many things that are a challenge to an election day, including voter suppression in too many states.
Yeah, Joy, I know that you're an analyst and also a strategist. If you know, you should be advising the campaign. Maybe you are, but talk to us about the advice you would give to the Biden-Harris ticket going forward to make sure that this Black woman becomes vice president of the United States. What's your advice?
Yeah, I've made it no secret, my advice to the party and to the campaign itself. You mentioned some numbers previously about the number of, and just to expand it, not only Black folks who did not turn out to vote, but there are white folks who did not turn out to
Right.
vote in that election as well, that are disconnected, that voted in higher numbers during the Obama years as well. And the advice that I've been given is, rather than the party and the campaign focus on trying to flip voters that have, as I say, already showed you they're behind by voting for somebody, it is
Right.
much easier from a resource perspective to engage with voters who are already registered, who did not turn out, and actually speak to them. And it's actually something that works. For Higher Heights, I led a project during the midterm election during President Obama's term, in which
Right.
I talked directly to Black women in Ohio and Georgia just about the issues that they said mattered to them. Didn't advocate for a candidate,
Right.
for a particular candidate, and we saw a huge increase in participation. Just by talking to Black women about the issues that matter to them, they turned out. So imagine if you talk about the issues that matter to those voters and you engage them, and you actually have a candidate or an inspirational election, such as electing Senator Kamala Harris as the first vice president. Imagine what can happen from there.
And Martha, historically, what mistakes would you advise them not to make that were made historically?
Well, of course, historically, racism has been an instrument, right, of political operatives. The notion that you can appeal based on anti-Black racism to some constituents, that there's a zero-sum game in American politics that requires candidates and campaigns to choose. I think Black women have already established that they are a voting bloc to be contended with in 2020. But the tension, the persistence of anti-Black racism, I hope will not be something that in this race, at least on the Democratic side, will be accommodated in any way, right? That is something that has to be left in the past in 2020.
Right. So already something in places, like 500,000 mail-in ballots have been disqualified. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and legitimately people will not want to go and stand, even though Michelle Obama has encouraged us to not only bring our dinner, but the breakfast, for the next morning if we have to stand in line. Joy, is that what you're advising as well, rather than the mail-in ballot, do the in-person voting? What are you saying?
Well, I'm advocating for people to make a plan. And I start off by saying, one, it's verifying your own registration. If you've seen we're talking about voter suppression, and if you've seen, any of the documentaries or anything about Georgia, that there are
Right.
people who showed up and weren't on the rolls. That
Right.
also happened here in Brooklyn in 2010, right?
Right.
So one is verifying your information and making sure you're registered. That's the first step. And then, I would say, in voting early or voting by mail, whatever the option you choose that's best for you, because as you mentioned, we're still in a COVID pandemic reality. We still have people that are vulnerable. But to the people who aren't, voting early and making sure to get that in and verifying your information is what I'm leaning into. But just having a plan overall that doesn't have to begin and end on Election Day.
So Martha, with closing words in terms of should Kamala Harris succeed in becoming vice president of the United States, what trajectory change historically? Where does that bring us?
Well, I think the answer lies in part in those 120 plus Black women who are vying for Congress, because as we've learned over the last, I don't know how many years, what we've learned is that an administration without a Congress is going to be hamstrung. We live in that kind of fraught, polarized political climate. So we will see what not only Senator Harris and Vice President Biden will do. I think what we hope for is they'll do it with a new kind of Congress that will give them the ability to think through many of the questions that we've talked about, from police violence to economic inequalities and so much more. We really have an opportunity in front of us, but it will take much more than two candidates who make their way to the White House.
Right. So are you optimistic about the upcoming election? In a word or two from each of you, what you project the future of this country to be? Martha?
What I know is that Black women are not going home, that we have been in this for the long game. We've been in this for a very long time, and that November, while it is critically important, is not the end game. And so we will continue to write this story and the story of this democracy, whatever the outcome is in November.
Joy, in a word or two?
I believe the same thing. Electoral politics will not save us, but I believe in Black women and I believe in Black people, and I believe in the long game and making sure that our people survive and have the rights we are destined to have.
Well, the long game. Here's to the long game. Thank you both so much, Martha Jones.
Thank you.
The book is Vanguard. It's fabulous. Please go out and get it. And please, listen to everything that Joy says, because she's a terrific strategist. And thanks for joining us today. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. We'll see you the next time.